and held up the water bottle. Video evidence reveals that this employee became violent, started getting aggressive, which sparked a level of concern for the child's father, Mr. Hercules, to the point where an altercation ensued between both Mr. Perez and Mr. Hercules. Video evidence does reveal that Mr. Perez, the employee of Santiago's, intentionally reached in his left pocket at some point, according to the video evidence that I have, and you can see something protruding from his left hand, where you can also see that he's wearing a left glove. We now know that what was protruding from his hand was a knife that was clearly in his hand. And he lunged in the direction of Mr. Hercules on more than one occasion. Video evidence also reveals that multiple employees of Santiago's attempted to hold Mr. Perez back when they realized he was the aggressor. And he was still able to break loose, take off his shirt, and lunge in the direction of Mrs. Banks and Mr. Hercules, again, on 4 separate occasions. On one separate occasion, he blocks their vehicle when they are trying to leave. He blocks their vehicle from leaving, and you can see him hitting the trunk of the car, taunting the father to exit the vehicle without a shirt on. The father, who's a lawful firearm owner, at some point does brandish a firearm after he realizes that his safety and his wife's safety is in danger. Pursuant to Florida Stand Your Grounds, Mr. Hercules' decision to withdraw his firearm was most certainly justified. He had the legal ability to take out a lawfully owned firearm and order Mr. Perez to step back if Mr. Perez had a knife in his hand and was approaching him aggressively. Now, pursuant to the Florida statutes, it does explicitly stipulate that if an individual is approaching you aggressively with a weapon in their hand, they can be charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. I am concerned and outraged to learn that the Office of the State Attorney and this police department behind me refuses to do their job and charge Mr. Perez, even though there's clear evidence that establishes that he was the aggressor and he physically attempted to assault Mr. Hercules and Mrs. Banks. What's more concerning about this is that multiple other employees with Santiago's saw their co-worker behaving violently, and a female employee goes inside the store, calls 911, and intentionally provides misleading information to 911 dispatch that it was Mr. Hercules that was the aggressor, and used the term that she's scared for her life and he has a gun, but failed to mention that her own co-worker was the aggressor, pulled out a knife off of a false accusation of urinating on public property or private property. Mr. Hercules and Mrs. Banks and their 3-year-old daughter were victims of Mr. Perez's criminal actions, but it didn't end there. After Mr. Hercules and Mrs. Banks leave the area, they go to a nearby DMV because they knew that law enforcement was coming. They knew they were going to have to explain what happened in their version. So they wait outside. They just knew that it was safe to leave the area of Santiago's. So they drive just a short distance to a nearby DMV. And video surveillance shows officers employed with the Winter Haven Police Department, this department behind me, take out a dog. And they violently and aggressively approach Mr. Hercules, ordering him down to the ground face down. Then seconds later, you see Mrs. Banks with her 3-year-old daughter, Mrs. Banks who was unarmed, Mrs. Banks who does not have a criminal history, Mrs. Banks who did not display any behavior that was a threat to the public, Mrs. Banks who did not commit any violations of Florida law, who was just with her 3-year-old daughter in the vicinity of where her child's father was being detained. You see these same officers draw their weapons towards Mrs. Banks in the presence of this 3-year-old child, and they order this mother and this child down to lay down face down on the ground with their hands behind their backs. A 3-year-old child was ordered to the ground face down, and she put her hands behind her back. A 3-year-old child. While officers had their guns pointed in the direction, even though they knew, according to the 911 call, that Mrs. Banks was not the one who had the weapon, that Mrs. Banks was not the one who attacked or even participated in the assault that occurred between Mr. Perez and Mr. Hercules. But yet, they found it within their will to violate the civil rights of Mrs. Banks, order her to the ground in front of her child, with her child on the ground, like she was a dog. Yeah. Then they unlawfully detain her for an hour, and while she repeatedly asks them, what are they detaining for? They ignore her. That is a blatant violation of her Fourth Amendment rights. They had her detained for an hour because they were fishing for something to charge her with. They were hoping they could find something to charge her with because they had to justify why their officers drew a weapon on a 3-year-old little girl. They repeatedly had the opportunity to make it right, but they chose not to. They had her detained for over an hour, even after they knew she was not a part of the altercation between Mr. Perez and Mr. Hercules. They had already searched her. They knew she didn't have the weapon on her. And now a 3-year-old little girl is forever traumatized. And she's expressed her desire to not want to be anywhere near law enforcement. Every time she hears a fire truck, she screams. I'm going to let the mother address that, because the mother's been deprived of her ability to stand up for her integrity. In the wake of the incident, Chief Monroe, who has an obligation to be impartial when it comes to enforcing the law on citizens of Winter Haven and also officers within his department, has chose to willfully deprive the community of the truth by stating to the public that his officers immediately retrieved the child off the ground after the child was laying face down. Video evidence proves otherwise. Video evidence proves the child got herself up off the ground. Then Chief Monroe goes off to try to blame the mother for why his officers chose to violate her Fourth Amendment rights. We're living in a day and time where law enforcement cannot accept accountability for their own actions. But they want to blame a black mother, an unarmed black mother, as to why officers chose to willfully violate her Fourth Amendment rights and unlawfully detain her for an hour and not even tell her why she was being detained. So now Black Lives Matter Restoration, Inc. is going to be working with attorney Mariko Padilla. And we're going to stand in gap with the family, and we're going to ensure that there's accountability. If Chief Vance Monroe cannot lead this department with transparency and be impartial, he has to go. And we will go to the city officials, we will go to the mayor, we will go to the DOJ, and a letter has already been sent to them to investigate this matter. We are going to stand with the family as they pursue legal action against Santiago's. The 911 caller that willfully provided false information to 911 dispatch committed a misdemeanor. She needs to be criminally charged, so we're demanding that the Office of the State Attorney do their job and criminally charge the 911 caller who willfully provided inaccurate information and failed to acknowledge that her coworker was the aggressor. We are demanding that the Office of the State Attorney charge Mr. Perez with the appropriate charges in relation to the incident. We have learned that the Office of the State Attorney has found it within their will to charge the father with an unlawful exhibit of a firearm. But last I checked, pursuant to stand your grounds, as long as the father is not a prohibited person, which he is not, he has the legal ability to withdraw his firearm when he sees a person standing near him with a knife, acting like they're going to lunge at him. So we find those charged, we find that what we call malicious prosecution, and we're going to make sure that the father's supplied with an attorney that's going to immediately file a motion to dismiss that criminal complaint, because there's no way that case will stand. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the mother, because up to this point, she's been deprived of her ability to really be able to address how she feels. We've had a chief that's tried to ridicule her who she is as a black woman, who she is as a mother. And this was unprovoked and unnecessary. And this mother deserves her right to stand up for not only her civil rights, but her daughter's civil rights. Yes. So I'm going to have her come forward and talk about how this has affected her and her child.
Hello. So I'm just going to get to it. This whole situation has put my daughter in a situation where she's in a bubble now. She's not been herself for the last week or two since this thing has happened. Every time I turn around, it's, oh, is the police coming? She doesn't even have to hear a siren. before it's time to go to bed, where's the police? This is something that's not clicking in her head to just go away. And I don't think anybody understands what I'm dealing with as a mother, trying to keep my baby up and just trying to make her feel okay and safe, because in that specific moment, I was not able to make her feel safe. I didn't make her feel safe. Her father couldn't make her feel safe. All we could do as a family is just lay there with guns pointed at us, police yelling, screaming, cussing, doing everything that they could that wasn't lawful. And it wasn't right. And I'm right now, I can't even twist the thoughts in my baby head to make her think or believe that the police will ever protect her one day. Like, she doesn't see that. And that's not okay for a 3-year-old to even feel as if the people that were supposed to protect her are now against her and hurting her. And she's scared. And I live close to a fire department. This is sirens going off every day, constantly. And it's something where she's outside or we're walking, she's walking and she's hearing that and she's coming up to me and she's holding on to me, she's grabbing me because she's scared. And she should never have that fear. I've never seen my baby with that kind of fear in her life. Like, I don't install that fear in her life. Like, I haven't scared my child to that point. Even when I say something to her, she takes it for a joke. So for somebody like this to put that kind of fear in her heart is very uncalled for, and it's not right at all. Like, I don't even know how to express how I feel about it. I'm just hurt. My baby is hurt. She's got PTSD from this. Now I have to take my child at 3 years old to go to a doctor, a psychologist, to try to get her brain and everything back right. That's not right. That's not okay. My baby doesn't have mental issues. There's nothing wrong with her. Up until this point, I now have to start taking her to a doctor's office and doing things with her that I shouldn't have to do because I wasn't in the wrong. My baby was not in the wrong. Yes. My spouse, my husband, whatever you guys want to call him, he was not in the wrong. So it was no reason for them to come at us like that. If they would have did their jobs first and then came and tried to investigate whatever they needed to investigate afterwards, then we would have never been in that situation at all. Because if you could see, everybody was let go. None of us were taken into custody. Right. Me nor my baby father were taken into custody. Right. So if y'all would have just did y'all jobs properly the first time, then it would have been nothing said and done. Now all of a sudden y'all coming at us with all these different charges that y'all trying to charge us with, and for what? How's that going to affect my baby further down the road when we're not there to be able to support her anymore, because now y'all trying to imprison us and put us in jail because of something that y'all did wrong?
Yep. Take accountability.
I don't know, but at the end of the day, it's just hard to watch my baby have to be in this little shell that she's in, because that's not her. And it's not okay. So that's all I have to say about the matter. What I want to see happen from here is I want the officers that were standing in front of my daughter holding that gun, I need them to have some kind of legal actions done, because it was multiple police out there with their weapons, you know what I'm saying, pointed at us. So it was no reason that he couldn't, as that one officer standing to the side, not having no purpose in the whole matter, couldn't have put his gun away and said, hey, let me get you up off the ground. Instead, he walked away to help the police over there. And as he said, my daughter was not helped up by a police officer. She got up off the ground on her own, holding on to me getting up off the ground.
Despite reports of Chief Monroe made it clear in his press conference that his officers immediately rendered aid to the child and removed the child from the ground when they saw that the child was mimicking the mother, according to his words. But video surveillance footage reveals that the child picked herself up off the ground several minutes after she was forced to lie on the ground near her mother. The video shows that the mother was on the ground for more than 2 minutes with the child before the video shows the officers picking up the mother off the ground in handcuffs, then the child eventually picking herself up off the ground, walking with the mother to the back seat of a patrol car where the mother was detained for over an hour. And again, I just have to make it clear that this is a Fourth Amendment violation to not tell a defendant or to tell a civilian why they're being detained. And I have yet to see any body cam footage that shows them explaining, identifying themselves, one, then explaining to the mother why she's being detained. All I see is guns drawn in the direction of this mother who was unarmed and her 3-year-old child. And then I see an unlawful detainment for over an hour while they look to try to find something to charge her with. And when they realized there was nothing to charge her with, that's when they let her go without even an apology. And to further add insult, the chief addresses the public to try to blame the mother over what happened, to justify his officers. This is unacceptable. and we will not allow this. So we do have plans going forward. We do plan to meet with the DOJ. We plan to meet with every city official we need to make sure that there's accountability. But this should not have happened. There was many different ways to investigate this matter. This could have been handled differently and with care the moment they knew a 3-year-old child was in the vicinity.
Question for you. It's been 2 weeks roughly tomorrow since the event. You mentioned a letter to DOJ. What contact have you tried to make so far with either the police department or the city or the state attorney's office?
Yes. We first tried to meet with Chief Monroe the day after the incident. He willfully ignored us. We made multiple attempts to have communication with Chief Monroe, and he has failed to adequately respond to our inquiries. To my understanding, he wanted to meet, but not regarding this. He spoke with members affiliated with our organization, but he has yet to address me regarding this incident. We've made multiple attempts. So yes, a letter was sent to the Department of Justice. What we like to do is give at least 3 business days after it's sent to ensure that they got it, because we send it certified.
So you're filing a lawsuit against Santiago. Are you also filing a suit against the police department? Are you asking for the officers involved to be fired?
Well, based off of what the attorney has shared with me, he does plan to file a 4th Amendment claim on behalf of the mother. And I did provide his information in that press release. He did say that he would speak with you all as well, so he can address this accordingly. But from my conversations with him, he did acknowledge that he is planning on suing Santiago's on behalf of the mother and the child over the incident with the employee that did violently approach the mother, and the altercation that occurred after. We are also going to be petitioning to the state board that provides licensure for these restaurants to suspend the license of Santiago's, because we do believe that the actions of this employee and the actions of the coworker establishes a clear concern for our citizens and our black and brown people who choose to shop or eat there. It's evident that Santiago's lacked proper training for their staff to even make this frivolous accusation without merit, that the mother urinated. They have cameras all over their property, and if there was any indication that this mother did urinate on their property, this mother would have been charged a long time ago with indecent exposure, amongst other violations of law. I'm sure the state attorney would have loved to explore to justify why the officers had to use the level of force that they did. It is unlawful to use a public, expose yourself in a public setting and release your confidence, if I would say.